Anthony, 44, is a calm, diligent, and loyal man. For 5 years at Ravens Park Ventures, he became the company's steady foundation, always believing that hard work and integrity would be rewarded. Yet he never imagined that very faith would lead him into betrayal. Gerald, 58, a senior manager, sharp but manipulative. He believes power gives him the right to arrange everything to his advantage. To Gerald, fairness is nothing more than a slogan. Family and personal interest always come first. Tyler, 23, Gerald's nephew. Young, ambitious, but inexperienced and unprepared. After only 3 months in the company, he was handed the very position Anthony had long dreamed of. This marked the beginning of injustice, conflict, and an inevitable downfall. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the tang of permanent marker, the kind that never quite fades from a whiteboard no matter how many times it's scrubbed. Anthony sat at the far end of the long oak table, his posture straight but rigid, his hands folded too neatly in front of him. Years of discipline in the workplace had taught him how to maintain composure even when the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Today, that composure was tested like never before. Gerald, the division manager, stood at the head of the room with a grin so wide it bordered on arrogance. His suit was too tight at the midsection, the top button of his shirt straining against a neck thickened more by indulgence than hard work. Beside him stood Tyler, 23 years old, cheeks still carrying the soft roundness of youth, wearing a brand-new navy blazer that fit as awkwardly as his forced smile. His eyes darted nervously around the table, but when they landed on his uncle, Gerald, they steadied, as though reassured by the invisible safety net of nepotism. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald's voice boomed, carrying the practiced cadence of a man used to hearing himself speak. "It's my pleasure to announce the promotion of our very own Tyler Henderson to the position of Regional Operations Director." A ripple of applause spread across the room, polite but thin. Some clapped with genuine energy, others with the sluggish rhythm of obligation. Anthony's palms pressed together, the sound he made blending with the others. On the surface, he was another employee sharing in the company's celebration. But inside, each clap felt like a slap against his own face. 5 years. 5 years of 12-hour days, of missed dinners with his daughter Sophia, of walking out of the office long after the janitor had already emptied the bins. 5 years of steady growth, flawless client audits, and expanding accounts. This promotion, was supposed to be his. Gerald had practically promised it. "Keep doing what you're doing, Anthony, and when the time comes, you'll be the man for the job." And now, the man for the job was a boy. A boy who had been here all of 3 months. A boy Anthony himself had been asked to train. The clapping subsided. Gerald placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder like a king anointing a prince. "This young man is the future," he declared. "Fresh ideas, sharp instincts, and a drive to take Ravens Park Ventures into the next decade. With his vision, I know we'll soar higher than ever before." Anthony's stomach turned. Fresh ideas. Sharp instincts. Tyler hadn't even learned how to prepare a compliance report without Anthony rewriting it. He'd confused supply chain figures with revenue in front of a client just last week. But of course, Gerald had brushed it off as learning curves. Anthony kept his expression neutral. A mask, polished over years of corporate survival. Yet behind that mask, something fractured. A small, insistent voice whispered, "You've been used." Tyler gave a short speech, stumbling through phrases like strategic innovation and operational synergy. The words weren't his. Anthony recognized them from the training modules he himself had built. The irony was almost poetic, Anthony's knowledge, repackaged through Tyler's lips, being presented as leadership potential. The room applauded again, this time even thinner. A few exchanged looks said more than their clapping ever could. Disbelief, quiet frustration, resignation. Everyone knew. But no one would say it aloud. That was the power Gerald held, not respect, but authority enforced by paychecks. As the meeting broke up, Anthony rose slowly, feeling the stiffness in his knees, the weight of invisible years pressing down harder than usual. He turned to leave, but Gerald's voice caught him. "Anthony, a word?" Anthony stopped. The others filed out, murmuring congratulations to Tyler, who soaked it in like a thirsty sponge. Soon, only the three of them remained: Gerald, Tyler, and Anthony. Gerald's tone shifted, losing the public performance. "I know this might come as a surprise to you," he said, though his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated every detail. "You've done good work, no doubt about that. Solid. Reliable. But this company needs vision, not just stability. Tyler brings that vision." Anthony's jaw tightened. He wanted to laugh, or maybe to shout, but he did neither. Instead, he asked evenly, "So that's it? 5 years, and I was never even considered." Gerald spread his hands, a gesture meant to seem magnanimous but dripping with condescension. "Anthony, you're valuable. Don't mistake me. But not everyone's cut out for leadership. And let's be honest, you've got financial responsibilities. A steady paycheck, benefits, stability, that's what you need. Leave the big picture to us." Us. The word landed like a nail hammered into Anthony's chest. Gerald and Tyler, family. He was the outsider, the disposable cog. Gerald lowered his voice, as though sharing a secret. "Look, I know you're disappointed, but don't rock the boat. Falling in line will serve you better than making waves." Tyler avoided Anthony's gaze, fiddling with his cufflinks. There was no apology there, no recognition, only the silent complicity of privilege. Anthony forced a smile, one so brittle it could have shattered like glass. "Of course," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Inside, though, something shifted. A crack in the dam that had held back years of swallowed frustration. As he walked back to his desk, the office around him looked different, though nothing had changed. The fluorescent lights buzzed just as harshly, the gray cubicles stood in their same dreary rows, the hum of the air conditioning was as steady as ever. But Anthony no longer saw it as his workplace. He saw it for what it truly was, a cage. He sat down, staring at the blinking cursor on his monitor. For the first time in years, the reports and figures in front of him seemed meaningless. All he could hear was Gerald's voice echoing in his head. "He'll fall in line. He needs this job." Anthony's hands curled into fists. Gerald thought he had him trapped. Thought financial need would chain him to Ravens Park forever. But chains can be broken. And in that moment, though Gerald didn't know it yet, Anthony decided he would never fall in line again. The office lights dimmed at 6, as they always did, but Anthony stayed at his desk, staring at the spreadsheets until the numbers blurred into meaningless patterns. The hum of the building's ventilation seemed louder than usual, like the groan of some unseen machine grinding him down. Most of his colleagues had already gone home, their footsteps and laughter long faded into silence. Only a few stray lights glowed across the floor, lonely islands of productivity in a sea of darkness. Anthony rubbed his temples. He couldn't focus, not on the figures, not on the quarterly forecast, not on anything. His mind kept circling back to the meeting. The way Gerald's words had dripped with smug certainty. The look in Tyler's eyes, caught between nervousness and entitlement. And, above all, the hollow feeling that came from realizing years of loyalty had meant nothing. He thought about the nights he'd come home past 9, Sophia already asleep in her room, his wife Angela setting aside a plate in the oven for him. He thought about the weekends he'd skipped family trips because the Morrison account needed hands-on oversight. Gerald had known. Gerald had promised. And now, those sacrifices seemed laughably naive. The phone buzzed on his desk. A message from Angela lit the screen. "Dinner's getting cold. Everything okay?" Anthony typed back, "Still at work. Be home soon." He didn't add "You won't believe what happened today." Not yet. Saying it aloud would make it too real, and he wasn't ready for that. At home, the clatter of forks and plates filled the kitchen. Sophia, now 16, was scrolling through her phone with the distracted absorption only teenagers seemed capable of. Angela glanced up as Anthony walked in, setting his briefcase by the door. "You're late," she said, not accusing, just tired. "Long day." Anthony forced a smile as he sat down. Something like that. Sophia looked up, eyebrow raised. You look off. Did something happen? He hesitated. The truth pressed against his lips, but he swallowed it. Just office politics. You know how it is. Angela gave him a knowing look. She'd lived with him long enough to read what he didn't say. But she didn't press, at least not at the table. Dinner passed in fits and starts, conversation punctuated by the clink of cutlery. When Sophia excused herself to finish homework, Angela leaned across the table. Talk to me, she said softly. Anthony sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's the promotion. The regional director spot. Her eyes brightened. They finally opened it? That's great. Did you? No, he interrupted, sharper than intended. He softened his tone. They gave it to someone else. Angela frowned. Who? Tyler, Anthony said, the name sour in his mouth. Gerald's nephew. 3 months in the job, and they handed it to him like a birthday present. Angela blinked. You trained him. I know. And Gerald promised. I know. His voice cracked. For the first time all day, the weight of betrayal hit him fully, dragging his shoulders down. 5 years, Angela. 5 years of giving them everything. I missed Sophia's school play for them. I slept in that damn office more times than I can count. Gerald knew I was next in line. He knew. And he gave it to Tyler anyway. Angela reached across, squeezing his hand. So what are you going to do? Anthony stared at the table. The easy answer was to grit his teeth and stay. To accept Gerald's game, swallow the humiliation, and wait for another chance that might never come. That's what Gerald expected. That's what everyone did when they were cornered by bills, mortgages, and responsibility. But something in Anthony resisted. I don't know, he admitted. But I can't just pretend this is okay. Angela studied him, then nodded. Whatever you decide, we'll figure it out. Together. The next morning, Anthony arrived at work early. He watched as Tyler swaggered in, adjusting his too-new tie, trying to act like he belonged. Employees greeted him politely, but Anthony noticed their eyes. Measured, skeptical, guarded. By mid-morning, Gerald summoned Anthony into his office. The blinds were half closed, casting the room in slats of shadow. Anthony, Gerald said smoothly, I need you to help Tyler transition into his new role. Show him the ropes. Make sure he doesn't miss anything important. Anthony's jaw tightened. So you want me to do his job for him? Gerald chuckled as if it were a joke. Come on, you know what I mean. He's green, sure, but he'll learn. And with your guidance, he'll shine. And me? Anthony asked. Where does that leave me? Gerald leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. Where you've always been. Solid. Reliable. You're too valuable in your current position to move anywhere else. The words stung more than Gerald could possibly know. Not a leader. Not worthy of advancement. Just a cog in the machine, dependable but replaceable. Anthony's voice dropped, quiet but firm. You told me I was next. Gerald shrugged, utterly unapologetic. Things change. Best you accept it. Besides, you've got a family to feed, don't you? You can't afford to start over. You'll fall in line. You always do. The arrogance was staggering. Gerald wasn't just dismissing him, he was counting on his silence. On his desperation. Anthony stood, his decision not fully formed yet but beginning to crystallize. We'll see, he said, and walked out before Gerald could respond. That night, Anthony sat in his study long after Angela and Sophia had gone to bed. The glow of his laptop lit the room, the cursor blinking on an empty search bar. His fingers hovered, hesitant, then typed, Operations Director jobs near me. Dozens of listings appeared. He scrolled slowly, reading requirements, salaries, locations. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond Ravens Park Ventures. A life where his worth wasn't measured by Gerald's nepotism. He closed the laptop finally, leaning back in his chair. The decision wasn't official yet, but he knew. Something had broken today, something that couldn't be fixed with promises or apologies. Gerald thought he was trapped. But Gerald was wrong. Anthony stared at the resignation letter on his laptop screen for nearly an hour before finally hitting print. The words were plain, professional, restrained, exactly what Gerald would expect from him. But beneath that polite veneer was a storm. Each sentence felt like a declaration of independence, a refusal to be reduced to Gerald's obedient workhorse. He signed it with a firm hand, folded the paper neatly, and slipped it into an envelope. The letter sat in his briefcase like a live charge all morning. At his desk, Anthony worked with the same steady efficiency as always, but inside, his nerves buzzed. Every phone ring, every knock on the cubicle wall made his heart jolt. It wasn't fear, at least, not entirely. It was anticipation, like standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to leap. By 10 o'clock he rose, briefcase in hand, and walked the long hallway to Gerald's office. Each step felt heavier than the last. Gerald looked up as he entered, a smug grin already forming. Anthony. Just the man I wanted to see. Tyler's settling in well, thanks to you. I knew I could count on your support. Anthony didn't sit down. He placed the envelope on the desk. This is my resignation. The grin faltered. Gerald blinked. You're joking. I'm not. Gerald leaned back, laughter bubbling up as if this were some elaborate prank. Come on, Anthony. Don't be dramatic. You've got 20 years left in your career. You're really going to throw it all away over one promotion. Anthony's voice was calm, steady. It's not just one promotion. It's the principle. I gave this company 5 years of my life. I earned that role. Instead, you handed it to your nephew, who doesn't know the difference between a quarterly forecast and a grocery list. Gerald's smile thinned into a line. Careful. No, Anthony said, surprising himself with the force in his tone. I've been careful for too long. I've put this company ahead of my family, my health, my sanity. And you still treated me like I was disposable. I won't do it anymore. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Think about this, Anthony. You walk out that door, you'll have no reference from me. You'll be lucky to get another job in this industry without my backing. There it was, the threat Gerald had dangled over countless employees before. But Anthony felt no fear this time. Only clarity. I'll take my chances, he said, and turned to leave. Anthony. Gerald's voice dropped, low and sharp. You're making a mistake. Anthony paused at the doorway, then looked back. No. You did. He walked out without another word. That afternoon, Anthony gathered his team in the break room. Some had already heard whispers of his resignation. Their faces showed a mix of shock, admiration, and apprehension. I wanted to tell you all directly, Anthony began. I've decided to move on. My last day will be 2 weeks from now. Murmurs rippled through the group. One of his senior analysts, Mark, frowned. But, you trained Tyler. You should have been the one. Anthony gave a small, rueful smile. That's not how things work here. And I'm not willing to keep waiting for fairness that isn't coming. But I want you to know how much I've valued working with each of you. You're the reason this department has thrived. Keep doing what you do, even when leadership doesn't see it. The room fell quiet. Then, slowly, people began clapping. Not the perfunctory applause of corporate meetings, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. For a moment, Anthony felt the bitterness ease, replaced by gratitude. At home that night, he told Angela and Sophia everything. No omissions this time. Angela listened silently, then reached across the table to squeeze his hand. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Sophia, though younger, spoke with unexpected conviction. Dad, You've always told me to stand up for myself when something's unfair. Looks like you're finally taking your own advice." Anthony chuckled, the tension in his chest loosening. "Guess I am." For the first time in weeks, he slept soundly. The days that followed were strangely liberating. With his departure official, the weight of Gerald's manipulation lifted. He did his work diligently, training Tyler, documenting processes, ensuring nothing collapsed in his absence. Colleagues approached him quietly, some to express disappointment, others to ask where he was going. He kept his answers vague. One evening, after everyone had left, Anthony lingered at his desk. He scrolled through his email drafts, finally opening one he'd been hesitating over, a message to an old contact, Richard Kim, now an executive at Silverlinks Energy. He typed quickly, "Hi Richard, it's been a while. I'm exploring new opportunities and would love to reconnect. Do you have time for coffee next week?" He hit send before doubt could creep in. The reply came less than an hour later. "Anthony, great to hear from you. Let's meet Monday. I might have something that fits you perfectly." Anthony leaned back, heart racing. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long while, it was his. Meanwhile, Gerald fumed in his office. Losing Anthony wasn't part of the plan. He'd expected compliance, quiet resentment at worst. Anthony's departure would leave a hole no amount of nepotism could patch. Tyler needed guidance, and Gerald had just driven away the only person capable of providing it. But Gerald brushed the thought aside. In his mind, employees were replaceable, and Anthony would soon regret his bold move. After all, who walked away from Ravens Park Ventures and came out ahead? Gerald didn't know it yet, but the answer was standing in the elevator that night, heading down to the lobby with a briefcase lighter than it had ever felt. Anthony was done waiting for permission to succeed. The cafe was buzzing with the low hum of morning conversations, the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread wrapping around the air like a blanket. Anthony sat at a corner table, suit pressed, resignation weight finally off his shoulders. His nerves fluttered, but not from fear this time. It was anticipation. At exactly 9, Richard Kim walked in. He hadn't changed much since their last industry conference. Sharp suit, sharp smile, the kind of man who carried himself like every room belonged to him. "Anthony," Richard boomed, clasping his hand in a firm shake. "It's been too long. 5 years at Ravens Park, wasn't it?" "5 too many," Anthony said with a wry grin. Richard laughed, sliding into the seat across from him. "I've heard things. Gerald hasn't exactly earned himself a sterling reputation. Word is, he's running that place like a family diner instead of a corporation." Anthony smirked. "Nepotism's the house special." Richard's eyes sharpened. "And let me guess, you're the one holding the place together." Anthony didn't answer directly, but the silence was enough. Richard leaned forward. "Listen, Anthony. I'll get straight to it. We're expanding at Silverlinks Energy. We need a regional operations director for the Northeast Division. I've been looking for someone with experience, discipline, and the ability to build trust with both clients and teams. When I heard you'd left Ravens Park, it felt like fate." Anthony blinked. "That's fast." Richard chuckled. "The world moves fast when opportunity's involved. I can't promise the final decision, that goes through the board, but I can get you in the door. Honestly, your name carries weight. People know you delivered results despite Gerald's circus." Anthony's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. Validation. Recognition. Not empty praise from a manager trying to squeeze more work out of him, but genuine respect from a peer. "What about salary?" Anthony asked cautiously. Richard's grin widened. 30% higher than what Ravens Park was paying you. Plus, performance bonuses. You'll have resources, real resources, not duct tape and goodwill, to build your team. And most importantly, you'll answer to leaders who value competence over bloodlines. Anthony sat back, stunned. He had prepared himself for months of job hunting, networking, proving his worth all over again. Yet here was an opportunity, laid neatly in front of him, like a gift for refusing to compromise his dignity. He nodded slowly. "Richard, I'm interested. Very interested." Richard extended his hand again. "Then let's make it official. Send me your CV tonight, and I'll push it through the pipeline. You'll hear from HR before the week's out." Anthony shook his hand, pulse hammering. As Richard left, Anthony lingered, staring into his untouched coffee. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a narrow hallway leading to Gerald's office. It looked wide open. That night, Anthony returned home with an energy Angela hadn't seen in months. "How'd it go?" she asked, setting the table. He kissed her cheek before answering. "Better than I could have imagined. Richard wants me for a director role at Silverlinks. Higher pay, bigger responsibility, the whole package." Angela's eyes widened, then softened with relief. "Anthony, that's incredible." Sophia, listening from the couch, grinned. "Told you walking away was the right move." Anthony laughed, ruffling her hair. "You might be smarter than me." But inside he thought, "No, just braver than I was willing to be." Back at Ravens Park, things were unraveling. Tyler, though bright in theory, floundered in practice. His first team meeting ended in confusion when he mixed up revenue projections with expense reports. Senior staff, who had trusted Anthony's steady leadership, now exchanged uneasy glances behind closed doors. Clients noticed too. Morrison Industries, their biggest account, grew frustrated when Tyler delayed critical supply chain updates. Emails went unanswered, calls unreturned. Gerald brushed it off, insisting Tyler just needed time. But time in business was expensive. One evening, Anthony was working late on his application packet for Silverlinks when his phone buzzed. It was Mark, the senior analyst from his old team. "Hey," Mark said, voice low. "Just thought you should know. Morrison's threatening to pull out." Tyler missed a major deadline, and Gerald covered for him. Clients are furious. Everyone's on edge. Anthony listened, a pang of pity mixing with vindication. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. But it's not my fight anymore." Mark sighed. "I know. Just, things aren't the same without you." After hanging up, Anthony stared at the ceiling for a long moment. He hadn't left to watch Ravens Park burn. He left to save himself. But now, he realized, the fire was inevitable. And he no longer had to stand in the smoke. The following week, Silverlinks invited him for a final interview with their executive panel. Anthony walked into the sleek conference room, crisp suit, steady voice, and an aura of quiet confidence that came from knowing he had nothing left to prove to Gerald, or anyone else. They asked about his achievements at Ravens Park, his approach to leadership, how he handled setbacks. He answered honestly, weaving stories of resilience, problem-solving, and the ability to inspire loyalty. At the end, one board member smiled. "Mr. Hale, we can tell you're the kind of leader people follow, not because they have to, but because they want to." Anthony left the building feeling lighter than air. 2 days later, the call came. "Anthony," Richard's voice boomed through the line. "Welcome to Silverlinks Energy." The board was unanimous. "You're our new regional operations director." Anthony closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. It wasn't just a job. It was redemption. Proof that walking away hadn't been the end. It was the beginning. That night, over dinner, Anthony raised a glass of wine with Angela and Sophia. "To new beginnings," he said. Angela smiled, eyes glistening. "And to finally being valued." Sophia clinked her glass of soda against theirs. "To Dad being a boss." Laughter filled the dining room, warm and unforced. For once, the future wasn't a burden. It was a promise. Far across town, Gerald sat in his office staring at another client termination notice. His hands clenched the paper until it crumpled. Tyler sat opposite him, pale, overwhelmed, trying to explain numbers he didn't understand. Gerald barked at him, but inside, a gnawing fear began to take root. The empire he thought unshakable was beginning to collapse, and the man who could have held it together was gone. And he wasn't coming back. Anthony's first morning at Silverlink's Energy felt different from every other job he had walked into. The building itself radiated ambition, sleek glass walls, polished marble floors, employees moving with a sense of purpose rather than dread. The energy wasn't forced, it was alive. He walked into the lobby, greeted by a receptionist who smiled as if she genuinely meant it. His new ID badge clipped neatly onto his suit pocket, carrying his title in bold. Anthony Hale, Regional Operations Director. The words alone felt like vindication. Richard was waiting near the elevators. "Anthony, welcome aboard. Let me show you your new kingdom." Anthony chuckled, following him up to the 15th floor. His new office wasn't extravagant. Silverlinks prided itself on efficiency rather than waste, but it was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A desk, bookshelves, a conference table. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about respect. "This is yours," Richard said, handing him the keys. "Your team's expecting you at 9 for introductions. No pressure." Anthony smiled. "Pressure's my specialty." When he walked into the conference room, 20 faces turned toward him. Analysts, managers, coordinators, specialists. Each of them curious, some skeptical, others quietly hopeful. Anthony cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Hale. Some of you may know me by reputation, others not at all. That's fine, I'd rather let my actions speak. Here's what I can promise. I'm not here to dictate from a distance. I'm here to work with you. Success isn't built by titles, it's built by teams. And I intend to build a team that wins together." The room shifted, the tension easing. People exchanged looks, subtle nods. Anthony noticed the smallest details, the way one analyst straightened in her chair, the way a coordinator finally smiled. They weren't used to leaders talking with them instead of at them. "Now," Anthony continued, "I've read your reports. I know where we're hitting targets and where we're falling short. We'll talk specifics, but first I want to hear from you. What's working? What's not? And what's standing in your way?" The discussion started cautiously, but as minutes passed, people opened up. Frustrations about bottlenecks, lack of resources, outdated software. Anthony listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. Not once did he dismiss a concern. By the end, the atmosphere was transformed. People left the room not just with a new director, but with a sense of possibility. That night, Anthony sat in his office long after most had left, reviewing the feedback. Angela called to check in. "How's day one, boss man?" she teased. He smiled at the sound of her voice. "It feels right, Angela. Like I'm finally where I belong. Not clawing for scraps, not proving myself to people who'll never see me. Just building something real." Angela's voice softened. "That's all you ever wanted. I'm proud of you." Anthony leaned back in his chair, watching the city lights flicker below. "For the first time in years, I'm proud of me too." Meanwhile, across town, Ravens Park was beginning to fracture. Tyler sat in Gerald's office, pale-faced, surrounded by reports he didn't understand. "Uncle," Morrison pulled their account. "We've lost $20 million in annual revenue." Gerald slammed his fist on the desk. "You're the director, Tyler. Fix it." I don't know how," Tyler stammered. His confidence, once buoyed by arrogance, had dissolved. The weight of responsibility crushed him. He had believed the title would make him powerful, respected. Instead, it exposed his lack of readiness. Employees were whispering in hallways, resumes quietly circulating. The exodus had begun. Back at Silverlinks, Anthony wasted no time proving his worth. Within weeks, he introduced efficiency protocols that cut project delays by 15%. He implemented cross-department collaboration meetings, something Ravens Park had never allowed. One evening, Richard walked into his office with a grin. Anthony, Morrison Industries just signed with us. Said they were tired of Ravens Park Circus and wanted a steady hand. I told them we had the best. Anthony blinked. Morrison? That's their biggest client. Correction, Richard said. Our client now. Anthony sat back, stunned. The irony was sharp. The very account Gerald had taken for granted was now his responsibility. By month 3, Silverlink's Northeast Division had surged ahead of projections. Anthony's leadership wasn't just effective, it was contagious. His team worked harder, but not out of fear. They worked harder because they believed in him. At a quarterly meeting, the CEO of Silverlinks, a tall woman named Catherine Liu, addressed him directly. Anthony, she said in front of the board, the turnaround in your division is remarkable. I want you to know, you're not just an asset to this company, you're a leader we see shaping its future. Anthony nodded, humbled. The words weren't empty flattery. They were recognition earned the right way. Back at Ravens Park, the spiral accelerated. Gerald barked orders, covering his nephew's failures, blaming staff for mistakes that weren't theirs. Tyler grew quieter, more withdrawn, realizing the opportunity he'd been handed was a curse. In a private moment, Tyler admitted to himself, Anthony was right. I wasn't ready. And now, I'm sinking everyone with me. But Gerald was too blinded by pride to see. One evening, after wrapping up a successful project launch, Anthony met Richard at a rooftop bar. They toasted with bourbon glasses, city skyline stretching in every direction. You know, Richard said, you could have stayed at Ravens Park, eaten your pride, kept your head down. But you walked away. That's the difference between people who stagnate and people who rise. Anthony swirled the amber liquid in his glass, thinking of Gerald, of Tyler, of the years he'd given to people who never valued him. Sometimes, he said quietly, walking away is the only way to win. Richard nodded, clinking glasses. And sometimes, walking away sets the whole truth on fire. Anthony didn't need to see Ravens Park burning to feel vindicated. He didn't need revenge in the old sense of the word. His life, his career, his family's future, those were his victories. But somewhere deep down, he knew, the real storm for Gerald hadn't even begun. The cracks in Ravens Park Ventures had started as whispers. By the 6th month, they were open wounds bleeding the company dry. Inside the once busy lobby, fewer people passed through the revolving glass doors. Where there used to be energy and confidence, there was tension, resignation, and the constant sound of shoes clicking in and out of HR's office. Employees weren't staying. Clients weren't renewing. And investors weren't picking up Gerald's calls anymore. Tyler sat at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet he couldn't decipher. His inbox was overflowing with red flag emails, contract termination, non-renewal notice, pending audit request. His hands trembled over the keyboard. He remembered Anthony's calm explanations during those early weeks, how he'd carefully walked him through cost models, vendor relationships, compliance protocols. Tyler had nodded, pretended to understand, too embarrassed to admit how lost he was. Now, those gaps were gaping craters. Uncle, he said one afternoon, voice breaking as Gerald stormed into his office. I don't know how to fix this. We've lost Morrison, Halstead, and Carson Tech. That's half our revenue gone. Gerald's face turned beet red. Then work harder. You're the director, Tyler. Show them you can lead. Tyler swallowed hard. He wanted to shout back, to admit the truth. I was never ready. You threw me into this because of your pride. And now we're sinking. But the words never came. He lowered his eyes instead. Yes, Uncle. The board wasn't blind to the disaster unfolding. Numbers don't lie, even if Gerald did. At a tense quarterly meeting, one of the senior partners, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Carter, slammed a folder onto the mahogany table. Revenue is down 60% in 6 months, she snapped. 60%, Gerald. That's catastrophic. Gerald leaned back, feigning confidence. Temporary turbulence. We're restructuring. Restructuring. Evelyn's voice rose. You placed an unqualified nephew in charge of operations, pushed out one of our most competent managers, and alienated clients we've had for decades. This isn't turbulence, it's negligence. The room buzzed with murmurs. Several board members nodded. Gerald tightened his jaw. I've been running this company for 15 years. I know what I'm doing. Evelyn shot back. Clearly, you don't. Meanwhile, employees were deserting like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Middle managers resigned in clusters. HR couldn't keep up with the flow of exit interviews. Those who stayed whispered about resumes being polished, about recruiters circling like vultures. For the first time, Gerald noticed that when he entered the office, conversations stopped. People avoided his eyes. The loyalty he once commanded through fear had evaporated. At Silverlink's Energy, Anthony read the industry news with quiet detachment. He didn't gloat, didn't smile, but deep inside, he felt the quiet justice of it all. Richard dropped a newspaper on his desk one morning. The headline read, Ravens Park Ventures under investigation for nepotism and mismanagement. Seems your old boss is making headlines, Richard said with a smirk. Anthony scanned the article. Anonymous employees had reported unethical hiring practices, Gerald's favoritism, and Tyler's incompetence. An external audit was underway. Investors were furious. Anthony closed the paper and set it aside. It was only a matter of time. Richard leaned on the desk. You don't miss it? Not even a little. Anthony shook his head. I don't miss the cage. At Ravens Park, Gerald's mask was slipping. He shouted more often, slammed doors, fired people at random. Each dismissal only accelerated the company's decline. One Friday afternoon, Evelyn Carter arrived at Gerald's office with 2 security guards. Gerald, she said coldly, the board has voted. You're relieved of your duties effective immediately. Your access has been revoked. Security will escort you out. Gerald's eyes widened. You can't fire me. I built this company. You destroyed it, Evelyn replied flatly. The guards flanked him, guiding him toward the door. Employees watched from their cubicles in silence. Not one voice defended him. Not one person stood up. The once mighty manager of Ravens Park left the building as just another man in a wrinkled suit, red with rage and humiliation. Tyler, left behind, lasted only 3 weeks more. Without Gerald's shield, the board demanded answers he couldn't provide. His resignation letter was short, typed in shaky hands. Effective immediately, I resign from my position as operations director. I acknowledge my inexperience contributed to the challenges faced by Ravens Park. I will be pursuing further education to better prepare for future roles. When he walked out of the building, there were no cameras, no applause, no anger, just silence. Anthony didn't learn of Gerald's firing from the news. He learned it from Tyler himself. One rainy evening, Anthony was leaving Silverlinks when he heard a voice behind him. Anthony! He turned to see Tyler, standing awkwardly under an umbrella, looking smaller than Anthony remembered. His tailored suits were gone, replaced with a plain jacket and tired eyes. Tyler, Anthony said calmly. What brings you here? Tyler shifted uneasily. I wanted to apologize. You tried to help me. I didn't listen. I thought I could fake my way through it, but you were right, I wasn't ready. And now, it's gone. All of it. Anthony studied him for a long moment. He saw no arrogance left in the young man, only humility, regret. You've got time, Anthony said quietly. Learn. Earn it properly next time. Tyler nodded, eyes glistening. Thank you, for everything. Even when I didn't deserve it. Then he walked away, vanishing into the rain. Gerald's story ended more bitterly. Stripped of his position, he tried to sue the board for wrongful termination, but the case collapsed in court. Investigations revealed his nepotism and reckless management. With no severance, no allies and mounting debts, he declared bankruptcy within the year. For a man who once strutted through Ravens Park like a king, it was the cruelest punishment of all, irrelevance. And Anthony. Each day at Silverlinks was a reminder that walking away had been his greatest act of strength. His division continued to soar. His team thrived under his leadership. Angela reminded him often that he smiled more, that the weight on his shoulders had finally lifted. He had not only risen, he had proven that the best revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes, the best revenge is thriving while those who wronged you crumble under the weight of their own choices. The storm had passed, but the echoes remained. Ravens Park Ventures, once a polished name in the industry, was reduced to a cautionary tale told in hushed voices at conferences. Gerald had disappeared from the scene entirely, his bankruptcy filings making small headlines for a week before the world forgot him. What lingered in the industry wasn't his legacy, but his failure. Tyler, however, chose a different path. Tyler's new beginning. 2 months after his resignation, Tyler walked into the glass-front building of Harrison Logistics, clutching a thin folder of documents. No fancy suit this time. No inflated title. Just a plain shirt, a simple tie, and nerves pulsing in his veins. The receptionist smiled. "First day." Tyler nodded. "Yeah. Entry-level operations assistant." The words felt strange on his tongue. Just months earlier, he'd been addressed as director. Now, he was at the bottom rung. But instead of humiliation, there was something else, relief. On his first day, he shadowed a mid-level manager named Claire, who briskly explained shipping schedules, client queries, and process sheets. Tyler scribbled notes furiously, the way he should have done when Anthony was mentoring him. At lunch, he sat alone, plastic tray in hand, but his ears were open. He absorbed conversations, learned jargon, and asked questions. This time, he didn't fake confidence. He embraced ignorance as the first step toward competence. One evening, after staying late to finish data entry, Claire poked her head into his cubicle. "You don't have to kill yourself on the first week, you know." Tyler gave a tired smile. "I wasted a chance once. I won't waste this one." For the first time in his career, Tyler wasn't climbing on someone else's shoulders. He was climbing on his own effort. Anthony's rise. Meanwhile, Anthony's reputation at Silverlink's energy soared. Under his guidance, the regional division didn't just stabilize, it grew beyond projections. He had implemented transparent systems, trained his managers thoroughly, and earned the loyalty of his staff. At quarterly meetings, Anthony's reports became the benchmark others compared themselves to. One afternoon, Richard pulled him aside after a particularly successful presentation. "You've done more in a year than some directors manage in 5, Richard said. "The board is considering you for vice president of operations next quarter." Anthony blinked, caught off guard. "Vice president?" Richard grinned. "Well deserved. You've proven not just competence, but leadership. You make people better. That's rare." Anthony's thoughts flickered briefly to Gerald, to the dismissive words, the sneer, the assumption he would never rise. How ironic, he thought. The man who blocked my path ended up paving it. At home, when he told Angela the news, she embraced him with tears in her eyes. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you just needed the right place to shine." Paths crossing again. One chilly November morning, Anthony attended a logistics conference in Chicago. He delivered a keynote speech on sustainable growth in operations management, earning a standing ovation from industry peers. As he stepped down from the stage, a familiar face caught his eye near the back of the hall. Tyler. He was dressed plainly, with a conference badge labeled Operations Assistant, Harrison Logistics. His posture was humbler, his eyes sharper, more focused. He waited until Anthony had finished greeting colleagues before approaching. "Anthony," Tyler said softly. "Tyler," Anthony replied. "How are you?" Tyler hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Working. Learning. This time, the right way. No shortcuts. It's not glamorous, but it feels honest." Anthony studied him. There was no arrogance left, only sincerity. I'm glad, Anthony said. That's how it should be. Real growth isn't instant. It's earned. Tyler nodded. I've been reading management texts, taking online courses, asking questions. I finally understand how much I didn't know before. He paused, then added, I wanted to thank you again for trying to teach me back then. I didn't listen, but I remember everything you said. It helps me now. Anthony placed a hand on his shoulder. Then maybe it wasn't wasted after all. The two men stood in silence for a moment, no longer rivals, no longer adversaries, just two professionals on different stages of the same road. The message. Later that evening, back in his hotel room, Anthony reflected on the strange symmetry of life. He hadn't sought revenge, hadn't plotted Gerald's downfall or Tyler's humiliation. All he had done was walk away, choose dignity, and pursue his own path. The rest had unfolded naturally. Gerald's arrogance destroyed him. Tyler's shortcuts humbled him. And Anthony's patience rewarded him. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with fire and fury. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the form of new beginnings, for some, and endings for others. Anthony closed his laptop, stared out at the city lights, and allowed himself a quiet smile. Gerald had always walked like a man whose shadow was larger than his body. At Ravens Park, his bark was feared, his authority unquestioned. But the man who once stood tall in glass-walled offices now shuffled through courthouse halls with paperwork clutched to his chest. The bankruptcy proceedings were merciless. Gerald's fall. It started with the clients. Morrison Industries had filed a complaint not just about Tyler's incompetence but about Gerald's role in enabling him. The investigation uncovered emails, careless, arrogant words where Gerald dismissed other candidates, noting only that family takes priority. That phrase, family takes priority, was quoted in articles, repeated in HR seminars, even mocked in industry blogs. It became the tagline of his downfall. In court, creditors sat lined up like vultures. Gerald's lawyer whispered strategies, but it was clear, the debts outweighed his assets. Investments he'd bragged about turned out to be over-leveraged gambles. He had borrowed against the company's success, and when the company collapsed, so did his safety net. The judge's ruling was blunt. Bankruptcy granted, assets liquidated. Gerald's house, gone. His golf club membership, terminated. His name in the business directory, erased. At 58, he stood outside the courthouse, reporters pressing microphones toward him. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any comment on the nepotism accusations? Gerald muttered something unintelligible and pushed past, his shoulders hunched. For the first time in his life, he looked small. That night, he sat alone in a rented apartment barely large enough for one man, staring at a TV that buzzed static because he hadn't even bothered to set up cable. His phone lit up with one missed call, an unknown number. No friends, no allies. Just silence. How did it all slip away? He thought. But deep down, he already knew. Anthony's test. While Gerald was sinking, Anthony was facing the storm that comes with leadership. Silverlink's Energy had just landed a massive contract with Global Grid Power, a client known for both prestige and pressure. The first shipment was a test run, delicate equipment transported across 3 states. Anthony had overseen every step of planning, but on the morning of delivery, disaster struck. A snowstorm hit the transport route. Trucks were stalled, schedules thrown off. In the past, Anthony might have panicked, thinking of the political consequences, the headlines. But now, standing at the center of the operations floor, he steadied himself. Options, he said calmly. Give me options. His team looked to him for direction. One manager suggested rerouting through a southern corridor, but it would delay delivery by 12 hours. Another mentioned using air freight for the most critical parts, though it would be costly. Anthony weighed the choices, then made the call. Split the shipment. Air freight the priority units. Reroute the rest. We absorb the cost, it's cheaper than losing a client. The decision was fast, decisive, and expensive, but it worked. Global Grid received what they needed on time, and Anthony followed up personally with their executives. A week later, an email landed in his inbox. "Anthony, your handling of the unexpected storm demonstrated the professionalism and reliability we expect from long-term partners. We look forward to expanding our contract." Richard slapped him on the back that afternoon. "That, my friend, is why you'll be sitting at the VP table soon." Echoes of justice. News of Gerald's bankruptcy reached Anthony through the industry grapevine. A colleague forwarded him an article titled, "From Power to Ruin, Gerald Caldwell Files Bankruptcy After Nepotism Scandal." Anthony read it slowly, feeling neither triumph nor pity, just closure. He remembered the day Gerald sneered, telling him he'd never succeed without Ravens Park. And here he was, thriving, while Gerald's empire crumbled. Angela found him staring at the article, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Does it feel like justice?" she asked. Anthony exhaled. "Not justice, just balance." The world corrected itself. Tyler's quiet resolve. Meanwhile, Tyler kept his head down at Harrison Logistics. He hadn't spoken much to his uncle since the collapse. When he saw the bankruptcy news, he felt a pang of guilt but also clarity. Gerald had given him a throne he didn't deserve, and it had nearly destroyed him. Now, starting from the bottom, Tyler was slowly earning respect in small ways. Staying late. Double-checking reports. Admitting when he didn't know something. At night, he'd study business management online, remembering Anthony's lessons about process before pride. He knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, it felt real. The contrast. Gerald, once untouchable, was now invisible, his phone silent, his legacy erased. Anthony, once overlooked, was now rising higher than ever, his name respected. Tyler, once arrogant, was now humbled, but rebuilding, brick by brick. 3 men. 3 paths. And in the quiet moments, Anthony understood, life has its own way of weighing consequences. Some fall under their own arrogance. Others climb because of patience. And some, humbled, learn to start again. Anthony's ascent. 1 year into his tenure at Silverlinks Energy, Anthony's name carried weight far beyond the walls of the operations floor. He wasn't just the regional operations director anymore. He was the man who had saved Global Grid's contract, the man who stabilized logistics after a hurricane disrupted supply lines, the man whose teams worked with precision because they trusted his leadership. Richard called him into the executive boardroom one Thursday morning. The long mahogany table stretched under soft lights, senior leaders in their tailored suits whispering over reports. Anthony entered with his usual quiet composure. Richard stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to vote on expanding our executive team." Anthony Hart, who has served as regional operations director for the past 12 months, has proven not only capable but indispensable. "I move that we promote him to vice president of operations." The vote was unanimous. Anthony sat still for a moment, feeling the weight of it. 5 years at Ravens Park had earned him nothing but broken promises. At Silverlinks, 1 year of authenticity had brought him exactly what he had always deserved. A different kind of leader. Anthony's first act as VP wasn't to tighten control, it was to loosen it. He began a mentorship program for junior managers, pairing them with seasoned leaders. "No one should have to stumble in the dark the way I once did," he said during the launch meeting. He remembered Tyler's blank face during those early training sessions, the panic in his eyes when forced into responsibility he wasn't ready for. Anthony wasn't bitter anymore. Instead, he used that memory as fuel to ensure no one else was ever thrown into a role without support. The program flourished. Young hires began speaking of Silverlinks as a company where people grew, not just worked. Retention rates improved, and word spread in the industry. Silverlinks didn't just pay well, it cultivated careers. Anthony at home. Outside the office, Anthony's life blossomed in ways he hadn't dared to imagine during his Ravens Park years. His daughter Sophia was in her 2nd year of college, thriving in her engineering program. One evening, while they shared dinner, she looked across the table with a grin. "Dad, guess what? I just got offered an internship at Silverlinks." Anthony laughed, almost choking on his wine. "So, I guess I'll have to start treating interns extra nicely?" "No," she teased. "You'll have to stay out of my way." Angela, sitting nearby, squeezed his hand under the table. The family he thought he'd lost during those long nights of overwork was whole again, stronger than ever. Tyler's climb. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler was earning his first genuine recognition at Harrison Logistics. 6 months of diligence had not gone unnoticed. His manager, Ms. Reyes, had a sharp eye for authenticity. One evening, she stopped by his desk while he was reviewing shipment schedules. "You've got a knack for detail," she said. "Most people would have missed the routing conflict you flagged today." Tyler looked up, a little stunned. "Thank you. I'm just trying to do it right this time." Ms. Reyes studied him. "Good. Keep it up. Integrity pays here." For the first time, Tyler felt something different from pride. He felt earned respect. It was small, fragile, but it was his. Gerald's silence. Gerald, however, was fading into irrelevance. The industry had blacklisted him. No reputable firm would touch his name. He tried consulting, but doors shut before he could finish his pitch. Even his old friends stopped returning calls, not out of cruelty but out of practicality. Associating with him meant associating with scandal. Neighbors whispered when they saw him shuffle down the street, gray hair unkempt, his once expensive suits traded for bargain rack clothes. He was a relic of an era that no longer respected bluster without results. Gerald spent long hours alone, replaying conversations, wondering where control had slipped away. But the truth gnawed at him. It hadn't slipped, he had thrown it away, blinded by arrogance. The unexpected meeting. It was at an industry conference, of all places, that paths crossed again. Anthony was a keynote speaker, addressing a packed hall on the importance of ethical leadership. Tyler was attending as part of Harrison Logistics' delegation, taking notes earnestly. When Anthony stepped off the stage, applause still echoing, Tyler approached him. "Mr. Hart," he said softly. "Do you remember me?" Anthony smiled gently. "Of course, Tyler." Tyler looked older, more grounded. His handshake was firm, not showy. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I wasn't ready, and I think you knew that. I don't blame you for walking away." Anthony nodded. "You're learning now. That's what matters." Tyler hesitated, then added, "I'm grateful for the way you still tried to teach me back then. I didn't deserve it, but I remember it. I'm trying to do it right this time." There was no bitterness in Anthony's heart, only a strange peace. He clapped Tyler on the shoulder. "Then you're on the right path. Keep walking it." Foreshadow of closure. That night, Anthony reflected on the journey, from humiliation to triumph, from betrayal to redemption. He thought about Gerald, about Tyler, about the fragile balance of power and humility. His conclusion was simple. Power gained without merit collapses. Power built on integrity endures. And in that truth, Anthony found his legacy. The awards banquet. 2 years after leaving Ravens Park, Anthony stood in a grand ballroom, chandeliers glittering above him. Silverlink's Energy had just been named Best Operations Employer of the Year by the National Industry Board. Richard stepped onto the stage, trophy in hand. This honor belongs not to one person, but to a culture that Anthony Hart has helped us build. The room erupted in applause as Anthony was called forward. He accepted the award, humbled but proud. 4 years, he had been overlooked, silenced under Gerald's nepotism. Now, in front of hundreds of executives, his name was celebrated for what it had always represented: integrity, diligence, and vision. Angela and Sophia, seated at a reserved table, clapped with tears in their eyes. Anthony's speech. When Anthony spoke, he didn't talk about profits or titles. Instead, he told a story. 5 years ago, I worked at a company where I believed loyalty and hard work would be enough. But loyalty can be exploited, and hard work can be stolen by those who don't respect it. For a long time, I thought my future depended on someone else's approval. But then I walked away. I left behind the politics, the nepotism, the unfairness. I discovered that sometimes the greatest power we have is not to fight for scraps at someone else's table, but to build a better one ourselves. The crowd listened in absolute silence. And here's what I've learned. True success isn't about revenge, it isn't about tearing others down. It's about thriving in your own lane so powerfully that the rest fades into irrelevance. The best revenge, if we can even call it that, is simply living better. The applause was thunderous. Tyler's turning point. In the same audience, Tyler sat with his manager Ms. Reyes. He had earned his place there, promoted twice in under a year, no shortcuts, no handouts. He watched Anthony speak, and for once, he didn't feel envy or shame. He felt inspired. Later that night, Tyler approached Anthony quietly, away from the cameras. "Your words, they meant something to me," he admitted. "I want to be the kind of leader you are someday. Not because of titles, but because of the way people trust you." Anthony smiled warmly. "Then don't chase titles. Chase growth. Earn trust. The rest follows." It was advice Tyler would carry for the rest of his life. Gerald's last days. Far from the banquet's lights, Gerald's world had shrunk to a rented apartment with peeling wallpaper and stacks of unopened bills. The industry had moved on without him, and bitterness was his only companion. Occasionally, he heard rumors about Silverlink's thriving, about Tyler finally making something of himself. He scoffed, telling himself it didn't matter. Yet deep down, a small, gnawing voice whispered, "It could have been different, if only you had chosen fairness over pride." But Gerald never admitted it aloud. Pride was the only thing he had left, and it was a cold comfort. Anthony's legacy. Years later, Silverlink's mentorship program had expanded nationwide, credited with transforming hundreds of careers. Sophia herself rose within the company, not because she was Anthony's daughter, but because she lived by his principles: patience, resilience, and fairness. Colleagues often said, "Anthony doesn't just build operations, he builds people." His name became synonymous with ethical leadership, a living testament to the idea that walking away from injustice could lead to greater horizons than clinging to what was never fair. Final reflection. One evening, sitting on his porch with Angela, Anthony gazed at the twilight sky. She rested her head on his shoulder and asked softly, "Do you ever think about Gerald? About Ravens Park?" Anthony smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. If I'd stayed, I'd still be fighting a losing battle in a toxic system. Walking away was the best decision I ever made. Everything else that followed was just life rewarding me for finally valuing myself." Angela squeezed his hand. "So in the end, you got your revenge?" He shook his head. "No. I got my peace. That's better." Closing message. The story of Anthony, Tyler, and Gerald wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about sabotage or schemes, or watching enemies burn. It was about something far more powerful: choosing dignity over bitterness, choosing growth over grudges, and proving that the most devastating revenge is not destroying others, but outgrowing them. And in the quiet strength of that choice, Anthony found not just victory, but freedom.